Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, The Recipe for a Quick, Peaceful, and Successful Cloud Migration. Speaking today, we have Xavi Nijhaven, Senior Product Marketing Manager at New Relic, and Jimmy Stetzel, Senior Director, Migration and DevOps for Relic Cloud. Before we get started, there's a few housekeeping items to go over. First, today's webinar will be recorded, and a recording will be sent to you shortly after the presentation. There will be a live Q&A after the presentation, so please submit any questions you might have in the GoToWebinar control panel. And last, there will be a brief survey at the end of the webinar, so please take the time to give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Now, I'll hand it off to Xavi.
Thanks, Jose. Let's start with a quick word about myself. My name is Xavi Nijhaven. I'm a Senior Solutions Marketing Manager here at New Relic. I've been in the IT world for over 10 years, have seen the IT world from different lenses, whether it's being a lead software developer or being a technical marketing engineer or product and solutions marketing, what I am today. I specialize in SaaS and cloud computing. I'm hands-on with different cloud providers. I'm AWS Certified Solutions Architect. So that was just a quick background on me. And if Twitter or LinkedIn are your thing to do, here is my handler for that. For those who might not be aware of New Relic, a very quick introduction of what's New Relic. New Relic is a monitoring solution that's a catalyst to adopt cloud faster. We're a public company, and a few things what I point out when I'm talking about adopting cloud faster is that, one, look at the scale at which we operate our services. We process around 1.5 billion events or metrics per minute. If you put that into perspective, that's like 600 times more Google searches or Twitter feeds that are done in that time frame. And another thing to point out in this slide is that we have around, when we looked at our data, our own SaaS data, we have around 45% of our app instances that are reporting from AWS. So customers are already extensively using New Relic on AWS and other cloud providers. And as you can see, we have a broad range of customers, including well-known global enterprises like Adobe or GE. And then we have a lot of disruptors like Airbnb and Ancestry.com in our customer profile. So that was a very quick introduction of what's New Relic and what we do. Now let's talk about cloud migration and adopting cloud faster. So before we do that, why do customers move to cloud? And I ask a lot of my customer base, and I often, sorry about that, I often get this question on I often ask them this question, like, what is in your on-prem environment that's not fulfilling your needs, and why do you want to migrate to cloud? And the reasons that they mention is definitely the limited scalability, the limited agility that their on-prem deployment has, and especially when they want to grow international, they have an international presence. That's another factor that migrating to cloud helps. And last but not the least, definitely optimizing their cost and making sure that they're not paying for their peak performance, deploying infrastructure for the peak performance, always maintaining that infrastructure on-prem, and paying for what they're using are the main factors what I hear in my customer base about why they want to move to cloud. And that's why they have a cloud initiative. As I said, they want to solve the scalability problem. They want to be more agile, and they want to use the different cloud services that cloud brings to the table, whether it is using cloud as an IaaS vendor or PaaS services or SaaS services, whatever it is, it just brings more agility to customers. And as I was saying, last but not the least, they want the pay-as-you-go model of cloud is definitely very attractive, and that's why a lot of people want to optimize their cost and migrate to cloud. So those were some of the reasons why customers want to migrate to cloud. But it's not that easy to migrate your entire customer base, get rid of your data center, and just move to cloud. In fact, if you look at some of the stats, InfoWorld said that 1 in 3 cloud projects will fail in 2018. In fact, just to put, I attend a lot of conferences and events, and I've seen that at AWS conferences, some of the customers that stand on the stage, they mention we migrated to cloud in 9 months, and that's like something to boast about. That if you were able to do it in 9 months or 12 months, that's a great achievement, and that highlights the fact that it's not an easy task to get rid of your deployments and migrate everything to cloud. It takes time, it takes money. And so today's webinar is we're going to walk you through the recipe for a successful cloud migration, just to make sure that migration to cloud doesn't have to be that hard or that dangerous, or you can de-risk your migration, and there are certain ways to do a peaceful and a successful cloud migration. So let's talk about that. In fact, I was talking about my customer base and my conversations with customers. And when we talk to customers, a common story that we hear is that, a common theme, I should say, that I see among our customer base is that they decided that they want to get rid of their on-prem environments and move to cloud. They did that, and they ran what in fact analysts and AWS calls as the 3 phases: plan, migrate, and run. So they basically decided to migrate to cloud and migrated everything and came to this run phase when they're actively running in cloud. And that's when they run into a problem, they run into an issue, the performance wasn't that great, and that's when they think of deploying a monitoring solution. In fact, if you look at the analysts, some analysts also recommend that. But what we have seen in a lot of our customer base is that if you deploy instrumentation earlier in your journey, you can save a lot of money, a lot of time spent in this migration. That is why here we preach that earlier you instrument, the faster you will go in your migration and your cloud adoption journey. In fact, when I look through different account bases and different customers and how our teams did some analysis on what are the various factors that you should consider when you're doing the migration. And if you consider the factors that, if you didn't deploy instrumentation earlier, your migrations might be slower. So you're paying a lot a lot more while your migration is happening. You're still maintaining your data center. You're still maintaining your engineering, full-time your engineering team is deployed in making sure your migration is happening and what's going on with your migration. And at the same time, you're also paying for your AWS bill. So if you put all these factors together and kind of calculate like how much money, effort, time you spent in that migration, if it didn't succeed, and when I'm saying migration didn't succeed, it might not succeed in terms of the budget you had put forward or the time you had put forward. So in all these factors, if you try to put like how much money you could have saved by earlier instrumenting in your cloud adoption journey, it turns out that it's a pretty big deal. And if it can be as big deal as saving $5 million on a $31 million migration deal. So it's definitely a big problem, a big opportunity that you can solve. And that is why we often tell our customers that, a 48 hours of instrumentation can save you months of effort and overlap costs in your cloud adoption journey. So now let's talk about what is this recipe for a successful cloud migration. What does it entail? What are the various ingredients that you need to take care of in this recipe to have a successful cloud migration? There are 3 parts to this cloud migration or cloud adoption recipe. The first phase is the planning phase. Planning phase is what you see on the very left-hand side. That's the phase when you are planning your cloud migration, building up your cloud migration strategy. That's not the phase when you're actually doing the migration, but you are actually planning, figuring out what are the workloads or which applications are the best candidates to migrate. What is the lowest hanging fruit which you can migrate quickly and prove success. I often talk to bigger enterprises and they have these questions, and we'll talk about that in the plan phase. The second phase is the migrate phase, where we talk about this is the phase when you're actively migrating and what are the things that you need to take care of while you're actively migrating your applications, your services to cloud. And the third phase we'll talk about is the run phase, that you already migrated your application, your migration ran fine. Then what? What are the things that you need to take care of while you're actively running in cloud? So these are the three phases in customers' cloud adoption journey, and we'll walk through all three phases, and we'll talk about what are the steps or what are the ingredients to be successful in each phase. Let's get started. So talking about the plan phase, what is the first step that you need to do while you are planning your cloud migration? And it comes up very often, and I tell people that if you are gonna, and simply sometimes a layman example helps a lot. So when I often tell, if you're a runner and you want to run at a high altitude, what do? You first run at normal circumstances and figure out what's your performance in normal circumstances, measure that, and then run at a higher altitude and figure out what's the difference. So you have something to compare with. The same strategy applies as the first step in the planning phase of cloud migration journey. You need to baseline your applications and figure out what's the performance of your applications, what's the performance of your infrastructure, what's the user experience. So basically baseline your applications today on-prem before migration. That's the part of planning. And how do you do that? The first thing we recommend is that create a KPI model. Figure out the things that matter to you, the key performance indicators of your business. It might be availability, it might be reliability, it might be user experience. Create a KPI model, things that matter to you, and baseline them on-prem. For example, here's a dashboard that shows a baseline of simple terminology, like you could relate to it very much if you're an ops person or if you're an SRE, or if you have talked about your application performance. The things that are measured here, the baseline here, are what's the availability of the application when it's on-prem, or what's my load time on-prem of different applications, and what's my AppDex score. Again, the KPIs might vary from business to business, but the first point is make sure you instrument your entire stack on-prem and baseline those applications. And I have an example here of a KPI model. As I said, the KPIs might vary based on your business, and it might be different for different companies. But pick and choose the KPIs that matter to you, matter to your business, and baseline them so you have something to compare with when you do migrate. And we'll see how we use these baselines in the next two steps as we move along in the journey. So the first step, baseline your applications. Now we come to the second step in the planning phase. Again, we are still in the planning phase. What's the second ingredient of planning your cloud migration? And before talking about the ingredient, I would tell you the problem that I've heard among customers is that I often get this question, how do I figure out what's the lowest hanging fruit to migrate to cloud? Or which applications I can easily migrate to cloud and which I cannot, or which I should not migrate to cloud? And I often tell them that this is the part of your planning phase in cloud migration journey, when you need to figure out the dependencies between your applications, dependencies between your application and infrastructure, basically dependencies in your entire stack. Why do you need that? Again, it's going back to the same question, that once you know what's the dependency, which application is calling another application, or this application is calling a database, now you have that information that, okay, if there is an application that has thousands of dependencies, maybe it is not a low-hanging fruit for migration. It would need a lot of effort, or maybe the dependencies need to be moved along with that application. If you find that an application calls a database as a dependency, so you should probably move those two. If you're thinking of migrating that application, you should migrate the database as well. So it gives you enough information to figure out what are the best candidates for migration, so that nothing is left behind when you do migrate and realize, oh, this application that I migrated had tens of dependencies that I didn't know. Another thing, and I was saying that understand this dependencies throughout your stack. You also need to see the dependencies between your application and infrastructure. Which application is running on which infrastructure? If you want to migrate certain applications, you basically need to create a corresponding thing. Whether if you're going to AWS, you need to think about which server would you run it on. Would it be an EC2 instance that you would run it on? Or are you going to go to containers? So understand that dependencies between your applications, between your infrastructure is the second critical ingredient in your planning phase of your cloud adoption journey. And the third that often is often asked about, and I was alluding to it as well, that what's the best candidate for migration. So when you've done that baselining, when you've done that, understood the dependencies between application and infrastructure, that's the third step of coming up with a prioritized migration order. Like, what should you migrate first? What's in the scope? What is probably not in the scope for migration? And again, different companies adopt different migration order based on their requirement. You might, based on their initiative. Your initiative to migrating to cloud or cloud migration initiative might be that I want to get rid of my data center as quickly as possible. Your migration strategy might be that I want to migrate, for example, a common example I see in deciding the prioritized migration order is the strategy that my first priority is all my new services will be in cloud. And the second priority would be, okay, now all my new services are in cloud. The second priority is let's move all our non-critical internal tools. The third is then we'll move to moving the critical services to cloud. And the last order would be the rewrites. That's I think the most seen strategy of how customers are prioritizing their migration order, but definitely it depends upon you and what are your initiatives. That's one great example of how to prioritize your migration order while you're migrating to cloud. So those were the 3 steps that we talked about in the planning phase of your cloud adoption journey. Now let's talk about the migrate phase. That's the phase when you've done your planning, you've done your baselining, and now you are actually doing, whether it is the lift and shift or lift and shine or re-architecting your clouds, but you're doing the actual migration. What are the things that you need to have, or the things that you need to do in the migration phase, the actual migration phase? Again, the 3 steps in this phase. The first thing is, when you migrate, you are going to hit some roadblocks. It's a different environment when you migrate to any of the cloud providers. It's very different from your on-prem environment. So, and I see that a lot in my customer base is that, okay, they migrated to cloud. In fact, one of my customers said they migrated to cloud and they saw that, oh, the application performance is not that great in cloud. That was the roadblock that they hit. So how do you figure out what's wrong? Where is the bottleneck in the performance? Then how do you fix those issues? That's when you need to instrument, the moment you migrate to cloud, if you instrument the entire stack, you can figure out where is the bottleneck, where is the issue, and resolve that issue. I'll give you some examples of issues that folks see when they migrate. One common example, as I was talking about, was that you migrated your applications to cloud. Let's just assume it's a simple lift and shift. That's the easiest case. So you lift and shift an application to cloud and you found that the application performance wasn't that great. How would you go about, is it the cloud or is it the code? So if you have instrumentation in place, you can tell where is the bottleneck, figure out where is the additional time being spent, and figure out the issue. Another common issue is you did a lift and shift, you migrated to cloud, and you figured out that you are seeing some weird transaction errors that weren't there. So why are you seeing these errors? What's happening? Where are these errors coming from? They weren't there in your on-prem environment. So how do you unblock those issues? And that's where instrumentation plays a big role. There are some other examples here as well that you can look at, but they can be as benign examples that you use. You migrated to cloud. You started with a very big server, and your application is running fine, but you realize that the CPU utilization is very low. Well, that's not that big of a problem in terms of application performance, but you might be paying way too much than you need to pay in cloud. So that is a potential financial issue. So those are the kind of issues that you would come across while you're actively migrating. And if you have instrumented your entire stack, you can quickly debug those issues and get over those roadblocks. What's the second ingredient of a migration strategy is how do you validate your cloud improvements? And if I almost every other conversation. Sorry about that. Okay. So sorry about that. I think we got some echo from somewhere. We are back. So I was talking about the second step in our cloud migration recipe, and that is to validate your cloud improvements. Now, I mentioned lift and shift as one way of migrating to cloud, but what I often see in my customer base is customers want to lift and shift, but they also do something like a lift and shine. Because cloud, and what I mean by lift and shine is that they want to lift and shift most piece of their application, but they want to adopt certain cloud services. For example, one of the customers recently I was talking to, they have their on-prem environment and they don't want to keep maintaining the databases on-prem, and they want to use services like AWS Aurora, managed database services. So that's like they want to migrate most of their code as a lift and shift and do a little bit of change, like using the database as a service. That's what I call lift and shine, often referred to as lift and shine instead of lift and shift. Another example is, customers want to migrate, but they want to use the queue service, SQS, AWS SQS, or the notification services provided by cloud instead of building their homegrown and maintaining those homegrown informations. Another example of lift and shine can be that you migrate some piece of your application, but you want to use more and more AWS Lambda or the serverless functions that cloud provides. And there are many such examples. So and which is perfectly fine. You can do a lift and shift, you can do a lift and shine. That's the agility piece that we were talking about in the beginning. But how do you validate those cloud improvements that when you made this change? For example, on the left and on the right hand side in the slide, we show that a customer was on-prem and then they migrated to cloud, but they wanted to use CDN service. That was their cloud service that they wanted to include. So when they used CDN service, they could tell that they could validate that using this service actually improved my load times, improved the average response times. So they had a way to validate that the cloud improvements that they did while the migration was going on actually made an improvement in customer experience, improvement in application performance. So that was the second step that you need to do, have a way to validate cloud improvements. And third, but I would say very important step in your migration when you are actively migrating your applications is the acceptance testing. And I often ask my customers, like, how are you going to prove that your migration was successful? Is there a way to measure that your migration was successful? And that's what acceptance testing gives to you. If you have instrumented, and going back to the first step of planning phase, if you have baselined your applications on-prem, if you have baselined the performance, availability on-prem, and now you have migrated your applications to cloud, and you do that baselining again in cloud, you can compare apples to apples and basically prove that yes, your availability has improved, your application performance has improved, and say that yes, my cloud migration was successful. So have a way to do what we call acceptance testing for your cloud migration. In fact, a very good example is on the right hand side of the slide, where on the top part of the dashboard, it shows what was the availability of the application, what was the slowest load times in different parts of the world, and what was the AppDex score while the application was running on-prem, and the same thing while the application has migrated to cloud. So now you can compare all these metrics and prove that your migration is successful. So now we talked about you successfully migrated your applications, you've proved that your application migration was successful, and now you are running in cloud. You are using all cloud services, you're running in cloud, your application is in cloud. Now what? It's not like, often when I showed you the New Relic slide, I told you that we have many customers who are disruptors, who are already running in cloud, they were cloud native, and you became part of it once you migrated to cloud. You're running in cloud, but that just doesn't mean that you don't need instrumentation or active instrumentation while you are actively running in cloud. Because, and I'll talk about the 3 factors of why you need active instrumentation while you are running in cloud. 1, when you're in cloud, now you're using cloud services, you're using cloud infrastructure, and you need to monitor, what's the performance of the cloud infrastructure? What's the performance of the cloud services that I'm using? Again, if you're deploying your applications on cloud or on-prem, application performance is still something that is your responsibility. Your customer experience, how your customer experience is, monitoring that and keeping track of that is still your responsibility. So you need to monitor all those things while you're in cloud. The second thing I often see is that customers went to cloud. As we started with this conversation of why customers went to cloud. They went to cloud for all the agility that they get. So they're constantly re-architecting their applications in cloud. They're moving from a monolith to a microservices model. They're constantly trying to adopt newer technologies, whether it is going the serverless route, going from EC2 static servers to more containerized servers, more dynamic serverless, adopting AWS Lambda. So they're constantly re-architecting. And while they're constantly re-architecting, how do you make sure that you are moving in the positive direction in terms of your customer experience, in terms of application performance while you are doing this re-architect? That's one of the main reasons why you need active monitoring of the entire stack while you are running in cloud. And definitely when you're running in cloud, you will realize once you're in cloud, you'll realize that you want to go multi-region, multi-AZ for being more resilient, for being more active, increasing the availability of your application. And how do you go and adopt this multi-region or multi-AZ kind of a deployment? And make sure that your application performance is great, or your page download time is awesome in all the regions in which your application exists. That's where you need to instrument not only your application performance, not only your infrastructure performance, but also your user experience and your page load times. So those were some of the things that are part of what we call recipe for success while you're running in cloud. Now, and I love this tweet that one of our customers did. They were migrating, looks like, from static server and trying out the newer service of AWS container service called AWS Fargate. So when they were migrating, looks like on the left-hand side, they show that before migrate, what was my performance? What was the response time? And when they migrated to Fargate with a 0.25 vCPU container, the performance actually became worse. And then they realize, okay, now they need to have a better container with more vCPUs, and they moved to a 0.5 vCPU and figured out, okay, the application for getting a better application performance, they need to move to a higher vCPU container in AWS Fargate. That's how you re-architect, but making sure that your application performance, application response time are moving in the right direction. So, I mean, the gist of the story is that if you want to adopt cloud faster, whether you are in the planning phase, whether you are in the migrate phase, or you are actively running in cloud, you need to monitor your entire stack. You need to monitor your applications. You need to monitor your infrastructure, understand the dependencies, and that would help you quickly adopt cloud and, in fact, de-risk your cloud migrations to a great extent. And here are some of the useful resources if you want to look into more about when I talked about application baselines. On the left-hand side, there is a cloud migration measurement guide that goes into details of how can you baseline everything on-prem and in cloud, everything in terms of starting from how can you baseline user experience, how can you baseline your application performance, how can you baseline your infrastructure performance, all of them using while you're on-prem and while you're in cloud. So that's a great resource to go and look at. And the second thing is on the right-hand side, if you're already familiar with New Relic, the right-hand side document talks about a complete detailed set of instructions on how to create a migration strategy, cloud adoption strategy, and what are the various steps that I mentioned, details on the steps, or in the plan phase, in the migrate phase, and in the run phase. So that was the recipe around a successful cloud migration. Then now I'll pass it over to our next speaker, Jimmy, who is a Senior Director of Cloud Migration Practices at Relic Cloud. Jimmy, over to you.
All right, thank you, Shavi, for the introduction. Well, as Shavi said, I'm Jimmy Stetzel, and I run the migration and DevOps practices here at Relic Cloud. I've been helping organizations transition to the cloud and Amazon for 6 years now, and I've been in the industry for 20. Relic Cloud is an Amazon Premier consulting partner that helps customers prepare for growth, eliminate uncertainty, move faster in the cloud-first world. And our core competencies are focused on migrations, DevOps, data and analytics, and managed services. And we call these our superpowers. We place emphasis on strategy, architecture and design, and cultural change as part of the cloud journey. Most recently, we earned our machine learning competency from Amazon. We are only one of 17 consulting partners globally to have achieved this competency. We're really proud of this accomplishment. So in this webinar, I'm going to first talk about just some general concepts to a cloud migration transformation, and then dig into some of the essential ingredients of the migration recipe. So when we talk about journey to cloud, there are a few ways you can get there. Let's start with description of migration and transformation. So migration, sometimes thought of as lift and shift, consists of some small changes and general results and the application pretty much running the same way as you do in the data center. You'll still gain some benefits of the platform, like you get newer hardware, ability to provision faster, ability to scale up and out. However, you really haven't realized the true power of the cloud yet. Transformation, on the other hand, is where you really begin to realize the benefits of the cloud. This is where you start to break apart monolithic apps, move to microservices, move to more managed platforms, heavy use of automation, and start to move to everything as code. This is where customers really enjoy the benefits of auto-scaling with service demand, and truly using only the capacity that you need to run your service. Then you can focus more on your business objectives. So let's dig in a little bit deeper and compare those two approaches. In this graphic, you can see that lift and shift is cheap, and it doesn't take as long. However, we really don't get much in the way of cloud benefits. But on the other hand, if you look at full code refactoring, you'll realize many of the benefits of cloud. However, you can also expect to spend a lot on development, and it's going to take a considerable amount of time depending on the number of applications that you have. So having experience with large amounts of customers, I generally see most enterprise customers fall into the middle area there, right, with some small refactoring and some lift and shift. And what I mean here is that most enterprises end up getting some small cloud wins by using managed services, such as a managed database like RDS or S3 for cheap object storage. And then infrastructure as code, right, using something like Terraform or CloudFormation. Using this approach, you're able to perform a cloud migration, gain many of the cloud benefits without taking so long that it becomes a burden on the overall business. So now that we've touched a little bit on migration and transformation terms related to cloud, let's review the cloud journey. So organizations typically follow a 4-stage journey as they adopt cloud. So begin with the cloud project, typically driven by curious staff, right? And they might have set up an Amazon account and they use it to run some demos or do a proof of concept. But next, they'll have learned some things during that project phase, and now it helps them put into place some of the foundations that are really required to manage app on the cloud. And the earlier success helps teams transition maybe a few prod apps to Amazon. Next, organizations embrace the cloud as an essential capability of their business, and now you start migrating the majority of their IT environments to the cloud. And finally, they're all in, and they focus on optimizing their infrastructure and becoming more sophisticated in the use of things like automation, orchestration, and cost savings with reserved instances and spot instances. Accelerating cloud adoption, it fosters innovation and helps organizations realize greater value more quickly. So the more quickly that an organization can move, the faster that they can start to retire their technical debt and free up resources, right, both capital and labor, to work on more strategic business activities. Well, so that all seems ideal, but what can happen in reality is that shortfalls in business change management and other processes leave cloud programs stalled. And some of those cloud programs, like Shavi was talking about, never recover. So my observation is that organizations that do not succeed with operational integration, especially change management components and organizational change, see their cloud adoption stall and the programs fail to achieve the desired outcomes. Building an app in Amazon, hitting some APIs, and getting an application running is one thing, but putting full operational capabilities around that, managing production, and providing seamless deployments is another thing. So how does Relic's Cloud help to ensure that initiatives don't fail? Well, this is where the essential ingredients come into play. So the idea here on the slide is that you've either added or reviewed each of these focus areas to make sure the organization has the ability to migrate all of your applications to the cloud. This will ensure you properly formulate a plan, you stay on the right path, and you can operate with efficiency. At Relic's Cloud, we work with customers to ensure they have these ingredients covered, and they've evaluated and put in place all the different policies, the guardrails, and they really understand how to run their production workloads in the cloud, and they're ready for mass migration at this point. So now let's dig into some of the details of those ingredients. Like I said previously, we often see customers struggling to make significant progress if they fail to address these areas. You can think of these ingredients as work streams as you're building out your cloud capabilities. So some of these that you see, they may be happening in parallel depending on the size of your organization. So let's start digging in. So migration business case. Now remember, you can create a business case at any phase in your journey. For example, you may be past the project phase already, and your team start to realize some incredible use cases or cost savings for your organization right out of the gate. And one thing to remember, when you're comparing your costs, you're not trying to compare one-to-one your infrastructure on premises versus Amazon. you're trying to compare to a target environment that's right-sized to handle the load and maintain the proper service levels. Right? In the cloud, you have the ability now to scale up and out and down easily, so you don't have to over-provision like we normally do in the data center. So with the details that you can get from New Relic, it will help you understand how to size the target environment appropriately to save you money right in the start. And another item in your TCO where you can show a reduction in cost is knowing that your dev environments only need to run when your developers are there using them. Right? So these can be turned up and down real easy with simple automation. And this can easily save you up to 2/3 the cost on a dev environment, for example. Another part of the TCO where we help customers is understanding their licensing requirements. So depending on, if you're running Microsoft, depending on your EA and your license mobility, etc., the bring your own license concept can get complicated. On the right, I've listed some advantages to think about when you're creating a business plan. There's one I want to call to your attention to, and that's the metered usage. In Amazon, you have the ability to really understand the cost to run an application, and it becomes very transparent how much it costs per app. And as an example, one of the customers I was working with, we had migrated a large environment to Amazon, and then only after a few short months of cost analysis, they determined that this product they had been developing for years just really wasn't profitable. And so shortly thereafter, they moved to a cheaper SaaS offering with similar capabilities, and they ceased development on that in-house product. So other advantages to list out are cost reductions as demand for services decrease. This is a scaling effect. And there's no regular refresh cycles of your hardware. That's taken care of for you. Also, as part of the business case, we need to understand what workloads and applications to migrate. Xavi touched on this a little bit. Initially, most organizations will get a quick win by choosing something with low complexity or an already loosely coupled application, for example. However, when you start analyzing the larger set of applications in your organization, it's really helpful to use the 6 R's approach shown in this graphic here. You can start to classify your apps this way. On the lower left, you see retire and retain. Really means do nothing, or maybe we'll visit these later. Rehosting is considered lift and shift for the most part, and can be manual or performed with automation tools to migrate your VMs and databases. Replatforming, or lift and shine, lift and tinker, is used extensively in large organizations where you begin to move to, say, managed service such as RDS, and you start to incorporate infrastructure automation. Repurchasing, or really just moving to another product entirely, usually means moving to a SaaS solution for most customers. And then refactoring, this usually means re-architecting, a lot of redesign, and moving to more cloud-native services, starting to break apart those large monolithic applications. So with this approach, you can create a high-level plan and classify each application that'll help you inform your migration roadmap. So the discovery and planning work stream consists of a much deeper investigation in your portfolio. This stream is where we collect, we analyze the data required to create a migration plan, and here we'll estimate the cost and level of effort required to migrate your entire portfolio. So as you can see in the graphic on the top right, there are 2 ways that we generally collect this type of data. One is data-driven, and so we're using tools. And the other is by performing interviews and gathering tribal knowledge from the staff and the teams. In the data-driven collection, this is another example of where New Relic plays a role in understanding the application performance metrics, those baselines, as well as the dependency mapping so that we know what we can move when. We combine this with the information we gain from the human discovery about all the applications to create our larger roadmap. So now we're going to kind of get into the people side of things for a minute. The Cloud Center of Excellence, definition is a cross-functional team. It's got executive support, and it leads other employees in the organization as a whole in cloud adoption, migration, and operations. We usually find that this COE begins with a group of real like-minded change agents, right? And they're committed to orchestrating critical business change throughout your organization. Cloud expertise will be critical to reduce security risk and impact to the business and increase speed of overall migration. We at Relic Cloud, we work in this capacity with many organizations and become part of their COEs. In order to be truly prepared, though, for a large-scale migration effort, customers must have a critical mass of team members with production Amazon experience, established operational processes, and a cloud center of excellence that's dedicated to organizing the right resources and leading this organization through the transformation of challenges. The people part of the transformation is generally the most critical, and it's the most difficult. So the COE I've depicted here in the bottom right, it provides solutions and guidelines in many areas such as governance, operations, automation, strategy, and then the idea is to share this knowledge with the other teams in the organization. Right? So this helps spread out that knowledge that they've gained about the platform real broadly, and it provides more access and authority to teams that are slated to use the platform. So it's ultimately the sharing and transparency promotes more innovation in your organization, right? And that's one of the goals. So on the landing zone in Amazon terms refers to the environment in which customers can migrate production workloads into. Right? So it has all the necessary account structures, VPCs, design, networking, operational security requirements are built into it so that you can operate and manage your production workloads at scale. And this work stream will have gathered all the requirements, created and validated the architectural design, and then built the design in AWS. The landing zone, among a handful of other items, is one of the things you really want to get right the first time. So I've worked with several customers who have set this up on their own, and they end up having to redo this foundation soon after launch because they just didn't plan their account structure and design right with growth in mind. So we ended up coming in and doing a migration within AWS to clean up and configure more of an enterprise style landing zone. So understanding your business functions, your business units, revenue generating applications is a key component in this design. So this will help with proper segmentation and cost transparency for your business. The account structure for an enterprise, kind of that I've got listed here as an example, it's important to maintain cost, visibility, and cost savings. I worked with many customers who have had several separate accounts in their organization, and they weren't linked together at all, right? They weren't linked to a central billing account that you see here. Just by simply utilizing a structure like this with a central billing account, you can immediately save money just, based on volume discounts, for example, of AWS services. So the billing account shouldn't contain any resources. It's just used for billing and reporting. And additionally, you can add more of these types of accounts like dev, test, prod for each of your line of businesses. And for our customers with compliance regulations, we generally break these into separate accounts for those containing PCI or HIPAA data, for example. And that way, it makes the audit process a lot easier, and as well, it keeps your access controls less complex across accounts. So security is generally one of the more challenging areas, right? As this critical piece is most important to businesses and their brand. And this work stream, what we do is define a structured approach to help you build confidence and trust in the platform itself. Most of the aspects of security in the cloud are familiar. However, we begin to move to more security automation, continuous audit, and a culture of security ownership by everyone, not just the security team. So generally competing goals when we talk about security, and that is how do we secure the environment and also enable users to accomplish their job without so much friction. We spend a lot of time working with customers to find that ideal and the ideal guardrails, right, while still maintaining the proper level of security. The default is usually to do it like we do it on premises, but that often doesn't fit in the cloud model of scaling and reducing bottlenecks. So on the right side, I've listed some of the core security areas an organization needs to ensure they've covered before moving to a mass migration stage. So for identity and access management, you'll create a process to manage your AWS accounts, define your IAM federation, or how maybe you're going to use an identity provider like ADFS or Okta. And then detective control setup, you'll implement a central logging design, monitoring rules, infrastructure security. This is where you'll define your security groups, determine your infrastructure tool of choice like Terraform, and define some basic security group alerts. In data protection, you'll make sure your data is classified, right? We'll define your encryption baselines and how you're going to handle encryption keys and rotation and assignment of them. And then when incident response category, here's where you'll develop your response plans, your patterns. You'll create RACIs for roles and responsibilities that are going to be part of the incident response workflow. And lastly, at the bottom, I've listed some of the fundamental elements you want to apply to each of these areas. So you'll architect your security control, you'll implement it, you'll automate as much as you can, and you'll put in monitors in place to ensure that the controls maintain their desired effectiveness. So on this slide, I have some examples of automated tools and a sample automated security remediation. So on the left side, here's a few tools you can use to easily set up some automated security functions. Right? So you have Lambda to respond to some events. AWS Inspector can automate vulnerability scans. You can incorporate those into your CI/CD pipeline. And then AWS Config, you can use that to continually audit your configurations. So on the right side, I have an example of how some of the tools can work together to continuously monitor your environment for security gaps. So in this case, an admin comes along and accidentally opens up a security group, allowing wide open access. Well, AWS Config is constantly monitoring the security group for changes, and as this one is picked up, it validates the security group is out of compliance, fires off that Lambda function, and then automatically removes the incorrect access rule, and so closing the security gap. So as we work with many customers requiring security compliance, like PCI and HIPAA, these automated security remediation methods, they provide a valuable way of providing just continual audit approach. In the operating model, the objective of the operations workstream is to review your current operational model and begin developing operations integration approach to support your future state operating model as you migrate into the cloud. So the operating model should encompass the relationships between people, process, and tools to support the delivery of the organizational objectives. The workstream you want to identify and document the high-level gaps from the end state, right, with respect to those tools and process. You'll define process and methods regarding monitoring, logging, infrastructure provisioning, asset and configuration management. Now, we'll also want to automate as much of the runbooks as possible as we're making this transition. So in addition, we'll define our business continuity and disaster recovery approaches. And in that area, you'll have a lot more options regarding DR, and you'll need to make decisions on the architecture based on your recovery time and recovery point objectives. In the lower boxes, here I'm describing some of the common operating models we see. On the left side is your traditional model, right, with the more siloed approach, where infrastructure and applications are managed by your on-premises team or some managed provider. And then a cloud engineering team still assists with the foundational infrastructure pieces there. And we still rely on change orders and human intervention to scale. In the automated efficiency model, in the middle, we begin to move to a run what you build methodology, right? We're moving more towards DevOps, where applications and some infrastructure is starting to be handled by a DevOps team. In this mode, we're using auto-scaling for infrastructure demand and taking automated actions on some events. And note here, cloud engineering team is still assisting with some aspects of the platform infrastructure. And as you mature, as an organization matures, right, they move to a full DevOps model. and that handles all aspects of the platform and their applications. The cloud operations engineer is also part of the team, and they automate as much of the operation as possible. This model requires a major shift in organizational strategy and culture. However, we can expect a higher release frequency and more innovation overall. In the migration experience workstream, it focuses on migrating a few applications in an agile manner starting from first day. Right? So the applications we migrate during this phase are selected using the data from the discovery workstream. So the goal of this one is to demonstrate the ability of the tool selection, AWS services, and the security controls before we enter into a mass migration phase. So some example candidates to start with might be, maybe your marketing sites, maybe you do a content management system or web application. And for these pilot apps, you probably want to avoid large ERP systems, mission critical, or applications hosting highly regulated data sets. The migration experience depends on having the application discovery, the landing zone, operating model, and security compliance in place. In the top right box here, I listed a few example patterns that you may want to consider as part of your early migration. So you have, like for like, which essentially lift and shift, where you migrate VMs wholesale. Or for data-centric applications, you'll establish the best method of moving databases and large data sets. And in other patterns, you want to explore a containerization of an application or automating the deployment by moving to a CI/CD model. For some of those legacy operating systems, they're still valuable to the business. You want to begin testing moving from something like Solaris or AIX to Linux for one of your patterns. So with these patterns, now you'll have a pathway to the cloud for the majority of your apps across the organization. And then as far as the teams go in the bottom right, plan on using an agile style team of about 5 to 7 people that are really focused on the migrations and building muscle memory around the different processes. You'll want a dedicated team if at all possible and a mix of skill sets. It's important to make sure that you have someone with Amazon experience on this team to ensure you are building with architectural best practices and you're moving towards a more cloud-centric solutions. This workstream is really where you put to test the design and controls you have established with the other ingredients, and you begin to create the full recipe. Remember to iterate your capabilities. So as you migrate more pilot apps, you will refine your operations and security controls. These should be documented and then shared with your other pilot teams in their organization so they're not using old designs or methods and they're not solving the same problems. And after this stage, you should feel confident that you have the expertise to migrate and transform and have the security posture to run highly sensitive workloads. And the broad organization has insight into the business and culture required to make this cloud journey a success. All right, so we've made this huge transition, running the cloud. And so it's at this point where you really want to understand your full production running environment. And New Relic can help you tremendously with this, right? New Relic can help to understand how many instances does it really take to maintain my proper service level. Once you know this, you can begin purchasing reserved instances, you can buy them with confidence, and begin saving a substantial amount of money on your cloud infrastructure. We help customers in this area every day. Relic Cloud can not only help you migrate, but we can help you transform into a more cloud-native environment where you spend more time delivering on your business objectives and less time managing environments. So with that, go forth and enjoy the recipe you've cooked up. Thank you.